Hey everybody, welcome back to Active Self-Protection Extra. Today, a really interesting article that actually was first posted where I came around it was from my friend Larry Correia, the famous author. And he's, another Correia, and us Correia's got to stick together. And it's on YouGov.gov or .com. And it's titled, What Americans Really Think About Political Violence. And I think it was an interesting article, and it is going to lead us into a discussion that I want to have today.
Lucky Gunner is my recommended trusted provider of freedom seeds for range or defensive use. In stock, good prices, and rocket fast shipping are why I go back again and again. Because of new guidelines, I can't link their site or say it, but you're smart and you can find it with a simple Google search. Stick it to the man by paying them a visit today.
I want to start this one by saying, yes, this happened. Of course, this one was posted on September 12th. And that is obviously very soon after the assassination, the murder of Charlie Kirk. And I've had several people ask me, John, are you going to comment on Charlie Kirk's assassination? This will probably be about the only commentary that I have on it. Sometimes I'm just going to give you for real. I mean, to me, it's the no-brainer here is assassination is horrible. And killing somebody for their ideas is abhorrent and yuck. Okay, full stop. And other than that, I'm not going to show the video. I'm not going to analyze it. There's nothing to analyze there. And I'm not going to mention the name of the murderer. And so sometimes the best thing to say is nothing, frankly, and let people grieve and then maybe circle back. But there was an interesting thing here on this particular article, and I think I want to send you to it. The link is in the description, and I really would like you to read it. But I'm going to show you some of the charts that they use. Actually, I'm going to show you all the charts in the article because I want to get some thoughts on this and say, wait a minute, we do have some work to do here, and talk about why that is. And so I'm going to put my glasses on here. This is just a polling organization, YouGov, and it was originally published in the Surveyor, their newsletter. Here's the overall thing, okay, is that the majority of Americans, political violence is a big problem and is morally repugnant, okay? So I think as a society, we absolutely agree to that. There are some interesting caveats in here, so I want to show you a few of the issues. So I would ask you, before you look at the stuff, do you believe that political violence is a big problem in America? And here's the thing. If you go look at the data, it says most Americans say political violence is a very big problem or somewhat of a problem. And the question they asked was, how big of a problem do you think political violence is in the U.S. today? A very big problem, somewhat of a problem, not sure, not very much of a problem, or not a problem. And it is broken out some by political affiliation. That we all pretty much think it's a big problem, right? So 58% of Democrats, 54% of independents, 67% of Republicans would consider it a very big problem, or somewhat of a problem. We are talking about a grand total of like 85 to 90% of Americans would say that, as a deal. 59% of U.S. adults say it's a very big problem overall, 28% somewhat of a problem. So you put those together, you're at 87% of the population, okay? And if you look, the numbers do kind of skew. The older you get, the more of a problem that you think it is. And I think that's because you've been around longer and you've seen more of it, right? Would be my guess there. If you go hit the link, by the way, you're like, wow, I'd like to see the data. You actually see they've got a hyperlink there where you can get the data yourself, which I think is kind of cool. Next bit though. Next one, Democrats and Republicans are more likely to say political violence is a big problem after attacks on members of their own party. This makes sense, right? When it's somebody that you care about, and when it happens to your side, you tend to think of it as a bigger issue. When it happens to the other side, you say, well, it's not as big an issue to me. Now, of course, the two that are in here, Charlie Kirk, a big one, and Melissa Hortman happened again, or Josh Shapiro. So you look at September 10th this year, that again, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. June 16th of this year, Melissa Hortman. April 14th, the assassination attempt on Josh Shapiro. So if you look, obviously those three happening this year, you look at the numbers went up, up, and up. But you look at them, they flip-flop from Democrats thinking it's a bigger deal to Republicans thinking it's a bigger deal when it went from Melissa Hortman to Charlie Kirk. And that makes sense to me too. If you go back to last year, it flip-flopped from there back when the assassination attempt happened on President Trump. Then it was Republicans who were a big deal. And then after the attack on Paul Pelosi, it was the other way around again. So basically, as we go through time, what happens is when it happens to one of the people that you think is on your political team, you think of it as a bigger deal than when it's not the other side. So somewhat right now, when people are like, well, Democrats don't think it's as big a deal, it's because it has not most recently happened to one of theirs. They will think it's a big deal again if and when it happens to one of theirs. I think that we should all think this is a big problem, no matter what, that when one of the people from my side, from my tribe, commits the violence is as big a deal as it's one of my tribe who is the victim of violence. And so that to me, we say, wait a minute, it is a big problem. It is terrible when it happens to somebody on the other side. So I don't care if you like Paul Pelosi or not. I don't care if you like President Trump or not. An assassination attempt on a political figure is, we should avoid that. We vote at the ballot box, not with the cartridge box, okay? It also says that older Americans are more concerned about political violence than young adult. Concern has changed in all groups at similar rates. So you can see here on the chart that it's always been higher among people 65 and older. I think because they've been around longer, it kind of, ebbs and flows. And right now is obviously in a very high state with the current state of affairs. That makes sense to me. Now, here's an interesting one, and one I really think we should think about as a society. And I'm going to encourage you on this one that I want you to think long and hard about this with the other side. And I'll say, if you follow me on Facebook, and I don't mind, I'll put a link to my Facebook profile. You can follow me there if you want. I want to be clear that on that, I post a lot of pictures of my cats, and I post gym selfies and discussion of a lot of things, and I goof off, and I post meme dumps. And so it's not all self-defense related there by a mile. Okay, so if you want more of my goofy personality, you can get it there, and I let my own flag fly there a little higher. And I've said there many times that I think, celebrating the death of somebody we disagree with is repugnant. And I think we should think it's repugnant, and we should repeatedly say it's repugnant. And it says most Americans say it's unacceptable to be happy about public figure deaths, but younger and more liberal Americans are more likely to call it acceptable. So when they ask, do you generally consider it acceptable or unacceptable for a person to be happy about the death of a public figure they oppose? About 77% of U.S. adults say that it's always or usually unacceptable. 14% said they're not sure. And 8% it's always or usually acceptable. All right. But if you look at it under political ideology, still 56% of very liberal people say it's always or usually unacceptable. That's good. About 20% unsure, but about a quarter of very liberal people politically think it's always or usually acceptable to be happy about the death of a public figure they oppose. Now again, I think if we say, wait a minute, I think if we qualify and we say, hey, wait a minute, that person who I oppose passes, and therefore their ideology isn't going to be as defended because they had a high voice in that issue. I'm okay with the idea that says, I'm glad that voice that I did not appreciate is not going to be heard anymore. I'm personally actually okay with that. That says, I think that the propagation of the idea is one I disagree with, so I don't mind that. But, especially when it's death by assassination, I think we should absolutely, that should be repugnant. Now, the interesting bit here, let's see where we kind of come around. So if you look, those very liberals there at the top are, quite much. It goes down liberal, down moderate, down conservative. Conservatives would say 91% of the time, always or usually unacceptable. But do you notice just a slight uptick among very conservatives? So it's kind of like at some point the liberals, the very liberal and very conservative start meeting around the back. And right now, the very liberal folks are the ones saying, hey, man, this is, we can go around the backside and say it's usually acceptable. Now, again, also you're going to see it as you get older, it becomes more unacceptable. And, the damn kids these days, I actually don't think it's a generational thing in current generations. It's just as you get older. If you look at complaints 100 years ago, the old people are like, oh, those dang kids these days and their punk rock music and their long hair and their parachute pants and their sex parties. It's just how it goes, right? As you get older, you tend to think a little bit different than when they were younger. So we see that among older folks and younger folks, that they tend to think of this stuff as a little bit more acceptable. Now, most Americans across the political spectrums say political violence is never justified, but younger and more liberal Americans are more likely to disagree. They ask the question, do you think it is ever justified for citizens to resort to violence in order to achieve political goals? Now, some folks, the answer for yes, violence can sometimes be justified. Not sure, prefer not to say, or no, violence is never justified. About 3/4 of, 72% of U.S. adults overall would say no. Now, if you look, very liberal folks would say 25% of them would say yes. Now, conservatives right now down to 6%. If you look again, that skews the older you get, then the less likely that you think violence is a justifiable means. And that happens liberals, moderates, conservatives. Okay. Now you might go, aha. But John, they would say, I think some of my liberal American friends would say, John, the Revolutionary War was using violence to achieve political ends. I would disagree with you, actually. I think that if you read the Declaration of Independence, the Revolutionary War was fought because King George wanted to fight. We said, we are now independent. We are not going to have political ties with you at all. We would like to be friends in peacetime, but in war, enemies, and we don't want that. So leave us alone now. And King George said, no, I'm not going to leave you alone now. I'm going to send battalions of troops. Don't understand. We'll consider that an act of war, and we don't want to go to war with you. He sent the troops. He started the war. It was a defensive war. The Civil War, I would argue, is the same. The firing on Fort Sumter was an act of war by the South. Complicated issue, right? But when Abraham Lincoln was elected president, then the Southern states saw that as a direct attack on their right to admit more states to the Union who were slave states. And therefore, they said, we're not going to go to Congress this year. And so they attacked federal forts in Fort Sumter being the first one. And again, from that point, hey, you've committed an act of war. This is now a defensive war, and we're going to stop you from attacking us anymore. And the first part, for sure, of the Civil War was fought on Union territory. So it was a defensive war. So when we say, wait a minute, these are offensive wars, we use violence to achieve political ends. No, it was defensive wars. World War II, right? World War I, for goodness sakes. You can go back and back and back and say, no, these are defensive wars. So I don't think that we can say that, and especially here in the U.S. in in these kinds of environments. Nah, man, political violence, not okay in any bit. Now let's look at this again. Liberals and younger Americans are more likely to say political violence can be justified, but are not more likely to defend violence in self-defense. I think that I'd like to retake this one here. And they say, do you think it is ever justified for citizens to resort to violence in self-defense or in order to achieve political goals? Saying yes, violence can sometimes be justified. About 2/3 of adults said yes, violence in self-defense can be justified at times, which is a very low number because I think that the question was poorly worded. And violence for political goals, only 10% of overall U.S. adults, which of course, if you look, it skews older. The acceptance of political violence skews younger. For self-defense, skews older. That's just going to be the way that it is. Interestingly, it's the moderates, the wording of the question, that had a problem with self-defense more than the liberals or the conservatives. And again, if I would ask my liberal friends and say, hey, if a friend of yours who was trans and somebody threatened them with violence, threatened to harm them, would it be acceptable for them, threatened to physically harm them, would it be acceptable, or tried to physically harm them, would it be acceptable morally for them to use defensive force in order to protect themselves? They probably overwhelmingly say yes, if we couched it that way. So I think somewhat it's how we couch those things. Again, I do think the younger folks here and the more liberal folks are more likely to say that that's the case. And I think that's an area that we've got to really educate better. And we've got to say, hey, wait a minute, let's push back. We don't do this, right? We can talk and we can disagree, and we go to the voting booth and we work on those things. Okay. A couple of other interesting things on YouGov on this. It says more Americans say protecting the Second Amendment right to own guns is not worth some gun deaths than say that it is. That was one of the things that Charlie Kirk said. Do you think that protecting the Second Amendment right to own guns is worth some gun deaths? I think that's a terribly worded question, quite frankly. So yes, not sure, and no. Among all U.S. adults, you're not going to get a positive response to that. And across party lines, you're going to get a very party line response. And that's exactly what we got. Again, do you believe in the right to keep and bear arms, that is an important right for Americans? I think you'd get a vastly different answer on that. And I think that was a poke at Charlie Kirk, quite frankly. And I think it was one of those things that if you listen to what he said about that in its context, I don't think it was that big a deal, but I also think it was kind of poorly worded, frankly. Okay. Final one. Liberals and conservatives are likely to say violence from the other side is a bigger problem. Here's one I think I want us all to get our heads around. Which is a bigger problem in America today? Left-wing violence or right-wing violence? Among all U.S. adults, we're pretty much even. And if you look among liberals, they say it's the righties who are a problem, like 75-4. Among right-leaning folks, they are the exact opposite. It's lefty violence that's the bigger problem. And among moderates, the moderates kind of skew towards the conservatives. Well, I will say from a statistical perspective, this year, it's been the lefties who have been a little bit more violent. And that's a change from the last several years before. I say that as a guy who's not, I wouldn't consider myself either liberal or conservative. I wouldn't consider myself moderate. I'm kind of a wackadoodle libertarian. And so, I think that here's the interesting part of this is that what we tend to do is whichever side we align with, we tend to say it's the other side who has the problem because we see that violence and we recognize that it could target us. Whereas what I think that we need to do as well is we need to say both sides are the worst. Okay. Violence is a problem, and that's the problem. Political violence is the problem, and we got to say no to that. And then from there, we have to then work towards solving that violence problem. So how do we do this among the very liberal and young crowd? I know some people are gonna be like, oh, it's the damn colleges these days. Man, I went to college. I was a kid. Guess what? I didn't get a whole bunch of that. But then again, I studied engineering. I studied nuclear engineering at Oregon State University. And, that we didn't get a big indoctrination of politics in that environment. We just didn't. Maybe it's because I was an officer candidate in the Navy at the time. Anyhow, I think that what we do is we open dialogue and we start talking about the sanctity of life, their life too, and we start respecting their lives. And I think that there are some political points to be made here that we say, wait a minute, we have to think about what is important to those young and very liberal folks. And that is people of color. That is LGBTQ people. And I think as we embrace and say they have value and worth and dignity as well, and their lives are worth protecting, and we decry violence against all those people, and those because they are us and they are human beings of inestimable value, worth, and dignity. Then we say, wait a minute, we decry all violence in there, and that I think is part of helping to kind of come on board and say, listen, we excoriate violence against those folks, and you should excoriate violence against those folks and other folks as well. And I think we can agree on that if we work on it. Anyways, what do you think? I'd go read the article, go read the entirety of it, and let me know what your thoughts are. I'd be interested. It's just something that I ran across that I think is interesting. Let's try to keep the comments civil on this one. Pretty pleased with sugar on top. If you get particularly ugly on this one, I will be moderating the comments. So let's play nice with each other, shall we? Have a great day.